Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Levy. I'm a faculty member here at the Harvard Kennedy School, and it is my honor, on behalf of the Kennedy School, to welcome you to your alumni reunion. Thank you. We are so happy and proud to have you here, and we hope you're going to have a magnificent set of days. Our first session today is part of an initiative called Compass. Leandro Urbano, one of our students here who's graduating, will tell you more about it. This session started 2 years ago, and it was meant to help connect alumni with the faculty at the school. We have an extraordinary set of faculty. Some of you will recognize some of them here. But without further ado, Leandro, please get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Welcome back to Harvard Kennedy School. It's an immense pleasure to introduce what is now our third edition of Compass. Now, you may wonder what Compass is and why we're here. Compass was an initiative created a year and a half ago with the aspiration of becoming a tradition at HKS. Maybe we can say that it has become a tradition already. The objective of Compass is creating a platform for our faculty at HKS to come and share 3 big ideas that transformed their fields. Our ultimate objective is equipping our students and broader HKS community with a 360-degree view of what's possible in policymaking and across the breadth of topics covered at the Harvard Kennedy School. Now, the way we have materialized this is by holding an event every semester, but not only leaving it there, but also recording these interventions, these talks, and sharing them with our broader community. Because we aim to transform the journey of students that are here and may think, look, I may not know these professors, I haven't had the time in the busy day today in the school to be able to learn about their ideas, but this event is giving them the opportunity to expand their perspectives. Also for alumni like yourselves, it's an honor to be able to reconnect with those ideas and also to continue to expand your perspectives with the new faculty as well as with the new ideas that they develop. Now, lastly, we aim to cater to the broader HKS community of potential people who could become part of this school. With this, I would love to thank our team, Alejandra Guardia, who's here with me today, who's going to be introducing our speakers, together with Dan Levy, who's the soul of this project, who brought us the idea a year and a half ago, as well as the deans and every team in the school, from the forum to marketing to social media to media services that we've collaborated and partnered with over the last year and a half to make this a reality. Now, the way the event's gonna work, now you wouldn't of course, expect a Dan Levy event without some technology. So you have some of that over here. We're going to be sharing this QR code so that you can scan it throughout the 4 talks you're going to listen to, and then ask your questions that are going to be upvoted and then answered in order, moderated by Dan Levy at the end of the event. Now, with this, please allow me to thank our 4 great speakers today, Julia Minson, Jeff Frankel, Matt Bunn, and Brian Mandell. And thank you for listening to us, sharing this conversation, and of course, sharing your enthusiasm about the big ideas that aim to transform our world. Thank you so much for taking part in Compass. Thank you for coming.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our 4 speakers for today. My name is Alejandra, and I am going to be presenting today our great first speaker, Julia. Julia Minson is an associate professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Specializing as a decision scientist, her research focuses on the psychology of disagreement, exploring how people interact with differing opinions, judgments, and decisions, especially on contentious identity-related topics. Professor Minson and seeks to develop simple, scalable interventions that enhance receptivity to opposing views, a critical endeavor in today's polarized environments. At HKS, she is affiliated with the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, and the Taubman Center for State and Local Government. Please join us in welcoming Professor Minson to the stage.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction. I am thrilled to be here. If I could get, there we go. That feels like freedom now. I am a social psychologist by training. So for those of you who might not know what a social psychologist is, I don't do therapy. I don't see clients. I don't know what's wrong with your kids. I am still trying to sort out my own kids. What I do is I run experiments on how completely sort of regular people navigate their completely regular everyday challenges, which there are quite a lot of. One of the things that I'm the most interested in is how can we get people who have deeply opposing perspectives, who have different values, different attitudes, even different beliefs about what's fundamentally true versus false, to have thoughtful, respectful conversations with each other. Okay, and so having done that work for nearly 20 years now, here are sort of three things that I think are important to share with folks. One is that I think we don't spend nearly enough time thinking about what are our goals when we disagree with people, right? Quite often, the most direct goal that people pursue, almost with sort of no thought and no question, is the goal of persuasion, right? I am going to change this person's mind, and I'm going to convince them that I'm right, and they're wrong, and they're misinformed, and I'm going to sort of set them straight, and then they will be grateful. But it turns out that there are other goals people could pursue. And it turns out that we have a lot of misconceptions and biases about our own goals and the goals of our counterparts. So, for example, one of the things that we found in our research is that people pretty consistently believe that in a disagreement, they are interested in persuading their counterpart, sort of like people don't deny that, but they're also very eager to learn about their counterpart's point of view. They want to understand where this person is coming from. Conversely, they think that their counterpart is only interested in persuasion, right? So they deny the idea that this person who's so wrong-headed that they see the world completely differently could possibly be interested in understanding where I am coming from. Okay, and one of the things we see is that a lot of the outcomes of disagreement flow from that set of beliefs. Do you believe that your counterpart is the sort of person who really wants to see your perspective, who really wants to learn about where you're coming from? Because the kinds of people that want to learn about our perspective are usually smart, kind-hearted, reasonable people. And so once I start thinking that way about the person I disagree with, the process sort of changes. Now, in thinking about, well, how do we convince folks that their counterparts are interested in learning about them, we've come across sort of two other ideas. One is that you only get credit for behavior. And I will kind of elaborate on that in the rest of the talk, but we spend a lot of time trying to make ourselves sort of more open-minded, more intellectually humble, more empathetic towards people who hold different perspectives. None of that is particularly productive in conflict, it turns out. The only thing that actually matters is what your counterpart can see you doing, okay? And they can't see you being open-minded or taking their perspective, because those things happen in your head, okay? The good news, though, is that the skills that you need in order to convince people that you're actually engaged with their point of view are extremely learnable, Okay, so constructive disagreement is not a talent, it's a skill. And like every other skill, particularly skills that are a little bit counterintuitive, it can be honed with thoughtful practice. Okay, so here are some thoughts on exactly how one might go about that. Years ago, we started looking for the kinds of people that are better at this. We decided that there are some people in the world who are better at what we call receptiveness to opposing views, and we built a website. You can go on this website, receptiveness.net, and you can take a quiz. It's called a quiz because we wanted to make it like accessible to people in the real world. But in reality, it's a personality survey that took 7 years to develop and has been empirically validated and published in a top peer review journal. So you can go to this thing, receptiveness.net/quiz, and you can find out how receptive you are to opposing perspectives. What this information will tell you is about your sort of mental habits when it comes to engaging with opposing perspectives. So one of the things we've learned is that people who are higher on receptiveness are more consistent about exposing themselves to information that both supports and opposes their beliefs. They are better at paying attention to opposing information, right? So imagine you are in a study where I force you to watch a long, boring political speech. Everybody tunes out. People tune out more to the side they disagree with, but people who are more receptive are better at maintaining equal attention. And these folks tend to be more even-handed in how they evaluate opinions that they agree and disagree with, right? So you could imagine, look, there's a reason that I believe what I believe. It's because the evidence for what I believe is better than the evidence against it, right? It's sort of logical to think that the evidence for my beliefs is better than the evidence against my beliefs. But people who are more receptive have a smaller gap, right? They see merit in opposing beliefs and they see flaws in the arguments for their own beliefs. They have different social networks. People who are more receptive have friends on both sides of sort of the liberal conservative continuum. And it turns out that other people recognize that this is a positive trait, right? So people who are more receptive are more desirable collaborators. They're seen as better decision makers. They're the kinds of people that we have more trust in and we want to interact with in the future. So this was all great, and we were very excited about it. And this was the point where we realized that receptiveness is wonderful for in your brain, but people are actually quite bad at expressing it, okay? And so through sort of a series of studies, we started identifying the ways through which you can express receptiveness, right? So being receptive, great, but making yourself more receptive also is like a very, very slow process. The question is, how can I act with receptiveness in my interaction so that my counterpart feels heard, feels like I'm interested in their perspective, and wants to have future contact with me? And so what we came up with is a toolkit called conversational receptiveness. So conversational receptiveness is a toolkit that we developed through natural language processing. So what this basically means is we take thousands of transcripts of people who disagree with each other, and we use machine learning to identify words and phrases that make their counterparts feel heard, okay? It's not like, are you really deeply listening to me and being empathetic? It's, are you saying the words that make me feel that you're listening and being empathetic, okay? Turns out that conversational receptiveness, as opposed to what's happening in your brain, strongly predicts conflict outcomes. Okay, so people who are higher on conversational receptiveness have better conversations. Their counterparts are more willing to talk to them in the future. They're less likely to call them nasty names. They want them on their teams. All the good things come to these folks. And the good news is it's easy to learn, right? Because it is not decades of therapy. It is just some words and phrases, okay? Now, I'm going to create value, as Brian would say. I'm going to give you these words and phrases. We shortened it all to an acronym, and the acronym is HEAR, as in I hear you. Okay, I have clever graduate students. They took like 36 different markers of receptiveness, and they boiled it down to 4 letters. The H in HEAR stands for hedging your claims. So it's words like, I think it's possible that, or this might happen because, or some people tend to think. So you could be saying a thing that is absolutely 100% true, but if you hedge it a little bit, your counterpart is less likely to just sort of like dive in there looking for the one exception to the rule. The E stands for emphasizing agreement. So we're not trying to fake agreement, right? We're not trying to compromise, but we're sort of reaching for something that we as humans can all agree on, right? I think we both want to live in a world that's safe for our children, right? We could all kind of agree on that. I agree with some of what you're saying. Again, that's true for literally every conversation. We are both concerned with. The A in HEAR stands for acknowledgement. So acknowledgement phrases I think of as like a little gift where you've been talking and I'm just dying to get in there, right? I'm just dying to interrupt and tell you why your idea is terrible. The gift is I will take 15 seconds to say, I understand that this thing is really important to you for XYZ reasons, right? So I take a few seconds to show with my behavior that I have actually been listening. Other option, I see your point, or what I think you're saying is. And then the R stands for reframing to the positive, okay? I think it's great when, I really appreciate it when, and it would be so wonderful if, oh, I love this. I love all the phones. This is amazing. All right, so this is the HEAR framework, and this brings me to that third point. This is learnable. This is trainable. This is something we can all practice in every disagreement we have. And I hope this will make your reunion conversations go more smoothly. Thank you.
Hard act to follow.
All right, thank you so much, Julia, for this amazing conversation on constructive disagreement. Now I'm gonna share again the QR so that you could all send your questions and vote for the questions that you like the most so that Professor Dunleavy can guide us on the conversation later. It's now time to introduce our second speaker of today, Professor Jeffrey Frankel. He is a James W. Harpel Professor of Capital Formation and Growth. He is a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, served at the Council of Economic Advisors in 1983 to 84 and 1996 to 99. He is a widely published researcher across international economics, macroeconomics, and the environment. On top of his teaching and academic research, he is very active in his blog and social media platforms such as X, sharing insightful analysis of key economic and political events, some of which we will enjoy today. Please join us in welcoming Professor Jeffrey Frankel.
Thank you. Oh, there I am. Three big ideas. I think we're supposed to tell you about ideas that come from our research, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wander pretty far afield. Three big ideas are, first, economic policy as maximization subject to constraints. Second, signaling in US foreign policy. And third, the syndrome of false imbalance. Yeah, feel free to take a snapshot anytime you want. Maximization subject to constraints. Now, I often hear from alumni that their least favorite course was introductory microeconomics. So if that describes you, I apologize and just hold tight for 1 minute. Optimization starts from the viewpoint of a household or a consumer. Stylized graph. Food is on the vertical axis and clothing on the horizontal axis. And the consumers want more of both. They want to move to the right and they want to move up. And their optimum point would be the gray dot. That's their peak objective. But they can't have their peak objective in general. Let's consider aggregating all the consumers into one aggregate demand. And we confront that with a set of points which is constrained by the technology and the capital stock and the workforce that we've got. And you can see there's a tangency there where the heavy curve just barely touches one of the lighter curves, and that's the optimal point. That's as far as you can get. There's this sort of theorem of economics that if there are no market failures, so no externalities, no public goods, we have perfect competition, it's very strong assumptions. But under those assumptions, the private market, the free market, gives you the optimal point. Producers face the relative prices indicated by that line, and then that steers the economy to where you want to be. If there's some distortion, such as government intervention, we'll get to the case of market failures in a minute, but if the government intervenes without addressing a market failure, that's going to produce a point that's less advantageous, point B instead of point A. And just to take one out of 100 examples, water subsidies. Have in mind the Western US or various other parts of the world where water is scarce and the government subsidizes it, and you end up being inefficient, producing less of both commodities. All right, in general we have market failures such as pollution, which is an externality. So I've got market measured GDP on the horizontal axis, and then something we care about that's not measured by the market, which is environmental quality on the vertical axis. Again, we have an objective, which is to have as clean an environment as possible and as high an income as possible, close to the upper right. Again, we're constrained by technology and capital stock and the workforce and so on. We would like to attain the point where the constraint curve is tangent to an indifference curve, or a curve representing a level of the objective. But in this case, free markets aren't going to give you the right answer. The free markets don't put any price, or at least not much price, on the environment. And you end up at a point like A with a much higher output of goods, but a dirtier environment. In order to achieve the optimum, the highest level of the objective, you need to tax pollution, such as a carbon tax or tradable emission permits, or other policies that might help you get there, is subsidizing research and development in clean fuels and so on. If the political system is working well, you can aggregate together the priorities of different people and end up with some point like B where you do relatively well on both fronts, the environmental front and the GDP front. What happens so often, I would say most of the time, is that different constituencies feel very strongly, and they stake out extreme positions, like people who say only the environment matters, and people who say only business matters, the environment doesn't matter. And then in the process of coming to a political outcome, you end up worse off. You end up at some point like C, where you have a less clean environment and less GDP. And again, just to pick an example out of 100, corn-based ethanol, requirements or mandates from the government that a certain amount of gasoline has to be based on corn-based ethanol is a very inefficient way of doing things. And you end up with a lower level of objective. Now, there are also political constraints. I did spend some time in the government, and I was my fellow economists on the outside back at the academia would ask me, do you find that economics is able to dictate the solutions, good economics, or there are often political constraints? And my answer is, well, of course there's always political constraints, but that's what makes it interesting. Maximizing the objective subject to political constraints, not just technological and economic constraints. And so to take an example, carbon taxes are rejected by the American people. Tradable emission permits have been proposed in Congress many times, but always turned down. So I'm suggesting that the second best might be something like subsidizing green jobs. And the goal is to do as well as we can, subject to the constraints, to achieve both objectives. All right, that's my idea number one. My idea number two is signaling in US foreign policy. And here I have to apologize to many of my colleagues in international relations because I'm trespassing on their turf. And I'm also going to apologize to people from other countries other than the US because I'm just talking about US foreign policy here. In part because for the hegemon, for the superpower, credibility is quite important, I think, and that's going to motivate what I have to say here. America should more highly correlate its signals of willingness to intervene militarily with actual prospects for intervention. That's my proposition. So I'll start off with giving examples of cases where the US government made declarations of resolve militarily that it was ultimately unable to back up. First one is pretty obvious, Vietnam. Second one, Lebanon, 83, 84. In both cases, when things didn't go well, there were people who said we should withdraw, cut it off. But the counter-argument was largely, well, we've come this far already. In order to preserve our credibility, we have to persevere. But then, when the costs were so much higher, we ended up pulling out. And we lost even more credibility than if we had cut our losses earlier. Something like that is in Afghanistan as well. And for my fourth example, the US government in 2008 called for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. Now we weren't really prepared to follow through on the implications of that. If you're a member of NATO, an attack on one is taken as an attack on all. And the US was not prepared to send military troops if Russia invaded Georgia, which it did, or later invaded Ukraine, which it did. So these are cases where the US government made declarations that it wasn't able to back up. The lesson isn't that the US should have persevered in these cases, but that it should have staked its credibility in the first place. Not all examples are of this sort. It's not just a problem of the US making threats it can't carry out. There are also cases where the US carried out threats that it had neglected ever to make. One notorious case, a few months before North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, Secretary of State Dean Acheson defined the US defense perimeter in Asia without including South Korea. In the end, of course, the North did invade. US-led UN troops to a very costly war that killed a lot of people and eventually succeeded in reestablishing the border close to what it was before. But it's interesting to think whether that whole war could have been avoided if US had more clearly signaled what its intentions were, what it was prepared to do. Another example is a few days before Iraq invaded Kuwait in July 1990, the US signaled that it would not object. And that again was a misleading signal because of course we did object and intervene, we're prepared to intervene. Third, the cases where advanced signals match the actual subsequent response. So this is what you want to do, I would submit. August 5th, 1990, after Iraq had indeed invaded Kuwait, George H.W. Bush declared this will not stand. And we intervened militarily and pushed the Iraqi troops out of Kuwait, of course. Second example, January 1999, Bill Clinton warned Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic to withdraw from Kosovo. He didn't. We had launched this NATO bombing campaign. Then Milosevic was forced to withdraw, and U.S. credibility was maintained. And Milosevic lost office in the following year. Third example, in December 2021, Joe Biden warned Russian President Vladimir Putin that in the event he invaded Ukraine, the US and allies would make Russia pay a very heavy price, which I think we have done. He did not threaten to send troops because we weren't prepared to send troops. All right, my third case, and this one is, I can claim some originality. I've suggested something called the syndrome of false imbalance in reporting. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with false balance. False balance takes a debate that in justifiable terms, in reality is rather imbalanced, but acts as if it is balanced in an attempt to sound impartial. And the classic example of this is when journalists used to give, I don't think this happens so much anymore, but equal attention to climate change denial as to the scientists arguing that climate change was real. Well, that's familiar. What do I mean by false imbalance? That takes a debate that is in truth balanced and pretends that it is imbalanced. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of this. The Affordable Care Act of 2010, which we call Obamacare. Now, some media reported that a majority of US respondents opposed the Affordable Care Act. It was 62% in a poll conducted by CNN in 2013. But they neglected to say that many of those who were classified as opposing the Affordable Care Act did it because they thought the law did not go far enough. It mixed together, combined those who thought that this was too big a government intervention and those who thought it did not go far enough and, for example, wanted a single payer system. Second example, the Federal Reserve is often accused of exacerbating inequality. Some argue that it's easy money when the Fed has interest rates too low that exacerbates inequality because it pushes up prices of stocks and bonds, and those are mainly held by rich people. But others who accuse the Fed of worsening inequality have in mind monetary tightening, raising interest rates, that exacerbates inequality because it increases unemployment and lower skilled workers and or marginal workers who recently entered the labor force, recently got jobs, are more likely to be fired first. So you have to acknowledge both sides of the trade-off. My fifth page, my last example, a current example of false imbalance in reporting. New York Times 3 weeks ago had a story with the headline, "Colombia's president is fighting for her job." This is a story ripped from today's headlines. Nimat Shafiq, the university's leader, met privately with faculty members who could soon decide to admonish her, which they have more recently. She's facing mounting calls for her resignation, including from House Speaker Mike Johnson and other congressmen. The actual article nowhere mentions that many critics are attacking her for calling in the police for not giving enough weight to the rights of demonstrators. And half of her critics are attacking her for the opposite, for not giving adequate weight to the rights of other people in the university to, for example, hold their commencement as in the traditional way required. I don't know if she got the balance right. You all probably have your own opinions. Similarly with other university presidents around the country that are dealing with this kind of trade-off. But if one is to reach an informed opinion and communicate, debate with others as to where they think the balance is, you need to acknowledge the pros and cons. It's no good to say everybody agrees that she's got it wrong without being explicit about the two viewpoints, the two sets of rights that she is balancing. Time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Frankel, for reminding us that economics can be applied much beyond markets. It's my pleasure to introduce our third speaker. Matthew Bunn is the James R. Schlesinger Professor of the Practice of Energy, National Security, and Foreign Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. His topics include nuclear theft and terrorism, nuclear arms control, and strategic stability, nuclear proliferation and measures to control it, the future of nuclear energy and its fuel cycle, and innovation in energy technologies. Before coming to Harvard, Bunn served as an advisor to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, as a study director at the National Academy of Sciences, and as an editor of Arms Control Today. He is the author or co-author of more than 25 books or major technical reports and over 150 articles in publications ranging from Science to the Washington Post. Please join us in welcoming Professor Bunn.
Hello, everyone. I'm afraid I'm going to be a little bit depressing, but there is some good news at the end. So I'm going to be talking about the real dangers posed by nuclear weapons. And my first idea is that there are actually a lot of different ways that nuclear war might happen. A lot of people think, nuclear war is never going to happen. You'd have to be an idiot to use nuclear weapons because it would destroy everything, etc. But this, by the way, is Nagasaki in September of 1945, just to give you an idea of the effect of one, by today's standards, quite small nuclear bomb. Almost all of the over 12,000 nuclear weapons that exist in the world today are substantially larger than the bombs that obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From the Cold War, we know that there are lots of ways that even when nobody intends to go there at the beginning, crises can spin into conflicts which can then spin out of control. And in particular, leaders might believe that they could use nuclear weapons in a limited way and then deter a major response. And that belief might turn out to be wrong. Meanwhile, evolving technologies are making these balances more complicated and in some cases possibly more dangerous, whether it's cyber weapons or hypersonic missiles or artificial intelligence. There's a wide range of these things that are changing strategic balances, changing how we have to think about how they work. So imagine in particular a Korean Peninsula scenario. In the past, it has not been that unusual for the North Koreans to carry out some major provocation, probably driven by domestic circumstances that made them feel they had to look tough. And in the past, they've shelled an island, they've sunk a ship, that kind of thing. At the moment, the policy of the Republic of Korea is that in response to that, they would want to strike back perhaps twice as hard, 3 times as hard, to deter further future provocations. So then North Korea feels perhaps that it has to strike back to reestablish its own deterrence. It might use a handful of conventionally armed ballistic missiles to attack, for example, American bases in South Korea that would be important to any major operation against the North. Well, the policy of the Republic of Korea and the United States is if the North Koreans begin using their missiles, we're going to go after all their missiles. Now that would look a lot, first of all, it puts them under what's referred to sometimes as use them or lose them pressure. If they don't use their missiles, the missiles will go away. But also, it looks a lot like the air campaign that would be the prelude to a major invasion of North Korea. So you could at least imagine Kim Jong-un concluding, not only would it not be suicidal to use nuclear weapons, it might be essential to my regime to use a few nuclear weapons against, for example, the bases and ports that would be essential to an invasion of North Korea, and then hold the rest in reserve to try to deter the United States from striking back. All such conflicts in the future are going to be complex, multi-domain, possibly multiplayer affairs. One of the things strategists in Washington are worrying about these days is the possibility that there might be conflicts with Russia and with China at the same time. Not necessarily because they'd planned together, but because one, seeing us distracted by a conflict with the other, might say, now's my moment. Now, Kennedy, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I can tell you a lot of Cuban Missile Crisis stories that would curl your hair or make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. We are doing a book at the moment that is looking at past nuclear crises and asking, okay, what factors made them more dangerous? What factors made them less dangerous? How have those factors changed in the intervening time? And how could policy today change those factors in a direction of greater safety? But anyway, Kennedy concluded the key is always give the adversary some face-saving choice between humiliating defeat and nuclear war, some face-saving way out. And he concluded, boy, you know, a national military is a huge, difficult to control operation with lots of different people doing lots of different things. You can't control everything that's going to happen. As he pithily put it, there's always one son of a bitch who doesn't get the word. Second thought, related to the first, we need to learn to deter without provoking. It's reported that it was Bismarck who said it's very dangerous to play chess one move at a time. You have to think about what the adversary is going to do when you do your move. So for, as one example, the United States has now the ability to threaten the nuclear forces of Russia and China, and then to use missile defenses to intercept at least some of what would come back. And that has then driven, in part, China's nuclear buildup that's ongoing, Russia's new nuclear weapons that they're building. So to maximize our own security, for each weapon purchase, each military plan, and so on, and each action in a crisis, we need to assess its value from our point of view for deterrence and defense, but also the degree to which it provokes something we don't like that the adversary might do. So one successful example, at least so far, of deterring without provoking recently was Israel's response to Iran's major attack with missiles, drones on Israel recently. And what Israel did was, I think, quite clever, and it was enabled in part by the amazing success of the coalition missile defense, which meant there was very little damage in Israel, which meant there was much more freedom for the political leaders in Israel to choose what they were going to do rather than having massive pressure for a massive strike back. But what Israel did was they struck a air and missile defense system in Iran using a weapon that the system was unable to detect. And it's the same system that Iran uses for defending all its major strategic targets. So Israel was saying, I didn't hurt you much this time, but I could if I wanted to. And so they were trying to send a message without provoking a further major Iranian attack. Now, unfortunately, this creates a lot of difficult policy dilemmas. For the Republic of Korea and the United States, of course, you'd want to be able to attack the North Korean missiles if you see them getting ready to use their missiles. You'd want to be able to attack their leadership. The United States often wants to maintain superiority for deterrence and defense, but then that provokes our adversaries to want to overcome that superiority. And these dilemmas are everywhere. There are plenty of things, for example, the United States would love to be doing in Ukraine to support Ukraine that we don't do to avoid provoking Russia. So I don't have any brilliant solutions to that problem, but I do think there's an institutional thing that we need to be doing better than we are, which is that when we're making these decisions, there needs to be a voice in the room whose job it is to raise the provocation risk issue and to, if appropriate, propose alternatives that might be less provocative. All right, a third thought is that nuclear arms control as we know it is on life support, but it's important to revive it. I like to say it's not dead yet, but it might die, but it's not dead yet. So we are down now to one remaining treaty limiting US and Russian nuclear forces. All the other treaties are gone. Some combination of Russian violations and US withdrawals have destroyed them all. New START is the only one left. Russia is not complying with New START. They're blocking all the inspections required under the treaty, but both sides are still sticking with the numerical limits that the treaty calls for. But it expires in February of 2026, so it's not very far away. Absolutely no talks are underway to replace it. China has launched a major buildup, and China is completely unconstrained by arms control. Both Russia and China are refusing any talks about arms control. But for more than 50 years now, arms control has been a tool that has helped us reduce the risk of nuclear war. It's provided predictability, transparency, and an ability to discuss with adversaries our key strategic concerns. And in that way, the very fact that you're discussing and that the other side is willing to limit their threat to you somewhat reduces your perception of the threat. It reduces the level of hostility that can add to the risk of crisis. So, because of all of this is in crisis, it is very possible that we could be on the cusp of a dangerous nuclear arms race. We have opportunities, I think, both in government channels, but especially in non-government, what are called track 2 channels, to try to help Russia and China understand that an unrestrained nuclear arms competition isn't in their national interests either. I remain somewhat hopeful that we can revive nuclear arms control. Now, I only have a couple seconds left, but let me not be too depressing by offering some good news about nuclear weapons. First of all, and it's sort of amazing, nobody's used nuclear weapons in combat for 79 years. Next year will be the 80th anniversary of the nuclear age, and no one would have predicted that in 1945. It's an amazing success story. More than 4/5 of all the nuclear weapons that used to exist in the world are gone, have been destroyed. Again, impressive success story. Less than 5% of the states in the world have nuclear weapons. And it's the same number as existed 35 years ago. We added North Korea, subtracted South Africa, admittedly a terrible trade, but still, no net increase in 35 years. It's an unbelievable success story, especially if you think about what happened during that 35 years. Collapse of the Soviet Union, global black market nuclear network led by Pakistan's A.Q. Khan, etc. More than half of all the states that started down the path to nuclear weapons decided to give up. So our efforts to stop the spread of nukes succeed more often than they fail. More than half of all the states that used to have potential nuclear bomb material on their soil that terrorists might be able to steal have gotten rid of it. I'm especially proud of that one because a lot of that work was done by a program I suggested. And the nuclear material around the world is way more secure than it was 25 years ago. I mean, literally there were, I used to wake up in the middle of the night. There were places with, basically nothing but a chain link fence and a night watchman. And there were places where there were literally gaping holes in the fence and no detector at all to set off an alarm if somebody was carrying plutonium out in their briefcase. And by the way, you can carry it in your briefcase and it's not really a problem enough for a bomb. All right, I'm going to stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bunn, for your interesting thoughts on nuclear wars. It is now time to introduce our final speaker of the event, Professor Brian Mandell. He is a senior lecturer in public policy, director of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Collaboratory, and chair of the Wexner Senior Leadership Program. His teaching and research address the theory and practice of negotiation, emphasizing third-party facilitation and consensus building in domestic and international protracted policy disputes. He also served in the Canadian Department of National Defense, specializing in UN peacekeeping and the implementation of arms control agreements. At Harvard, Professor Mandell is a Pew Faculty Fellow and affiliated with Harvard's Program on Negotiation, the Center for Public Leadership at HKS, and the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Please join us in welcoming Professor Mandell. Sorry, I have to.
You have to.
Sorry, I had a lot of extra.
Yes. Okay. Talk amongst yourselves for a couple minutes. Do that. All right. Let me just take. So, this is my tax season equivalent time of the year. Little knocks on my door. Professor, I finally started with 15 minutes to go till graduation to begin a job hunt. So, as part of the growing self-esteem movement in this country, I congratulated them on this very, very entrepreneurial effort. And so we reviewed the kinds of things that could come up in a negotiation and think about some of those scenarios. But what I want to move quickly to tell you is a story that happened a couple years ago that informs a lot of my work. I sent two folks, they were recent MPP grads, and I sent them both to a fairly large organization in San Francisco that does public-private partnerships and government affairs kinds of consulting. Here's the bottom line of the story from when they come home. Student one comes home with a $10,000 difference in salary above the other student. Student one comes home with 35%, I think, of their student loans written off by the organization. Student one had a partner at that time, and the organization paid all expenses and to stay in a hotel for a couple weeks until they got established there. I think that student two has finished their walk to California now. Student two, no extra leeway around compensating for student loans, no paying for partners to come. The job was the job, and to this day, this person doesn't know that they received in this initial offer $10K less than person number one. Okay? When I spend time briefly interviewing students when they return from these efforts, here's what I learned that informed the three key points that I want to talk to you about today. The first is that the students said that they had engaged in systematic preparation. They took the time, not only with the power of Excel, but the power of research and looking at the full range of what's happening in a market to be ready to negotiate, okay? Not just to have a pleasant conversation. And so before going to the table, this individual envisioned the target deal, okay? I tell students not to say, I want somewhere between, $70,000 and $140,000. Anywhere in that range will work, because in the past 2 years, besides going into debt, anywhere above zero, I'm making money, okay? They did not take Professor Frankel's class and understand the distinction between zero and a living. Focusing on your BATNA. This person had, to their credit, person number one was sitting on 3 firm offers, okay? Including, I guess I should say 2 in addition to this one. The other one was betting all their eggs in this basket, okay? Employers have a sense when you say, I'm looking at other opportunities, okay? Employers hold their faces with a careful expression so that they don't laugh at the person that says, you know, you haven't had an email responding to your first inquiry, let alone that you're sitting on other offers. And so they engage in hindsight analysis, because we talk about this in office time, about what happened in previous job opportunities so that they could develop their own catalog of what went well, what didn't go so well, and what they'd have to do differently, and understand what it is that might be difficult in this negotiation. So this was a couple years ago or so. San Francisco, as an economic zone, so to speak, wasn't doing especially well, taking that into account and understanding that this might be a challenging environment in which to get a job, okay? So understood the stakeholders in the game, be able to generate options and packages. And what I've tried to do with students, which I think is really important and that this person really got down, negotiation is an in-the-moment, high-performance, high-pressure activity. If you don't have the phrases, if you don't have the script in the moment, there's the potential for significant loss. And I'm not just talking compensation, but to your credibility and competence in that negotiation. This student also practiced red teaming. For those of you with military experience, this is a piece of practicing with a fellow student or peer the most awkward questions you could be asked today. So this came up in part, of course, during the pandemic. What did you do during the pandemic besides going to the library and reading ancient Greek texts? I was in Utah skiing, I said. Wouldn't be a great response to how you were building your career. And understood where this particular job might fit into next steps on the ladder, playing the long game. Tied to this is about public performance in the moment. So this student relayed to me after systematic preparation that they could argue with confidence because they had developed in working with their peers in multiple simulations. They had practiced the art of doing the 3-step dance of which negotiation is comprised, setting the table, managing the process, and closing the deal. So they were able to argue in a systematic and a logical way that was the basis of their persuasion, for which netted out an additional compensation package. And the key to this was practicing a series of micro skills and moves, often described as checklists for performance. And so a book I would recommend that you pick up if you haven't already, The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, talks about the series of moves that you need to make under pressure, and so that you can engage like the grand chess master and where to lead in this negotiation. And so these checklists, in effect, help strengthen the negotiator's ability to both innovate and be able to execute a script in real time, and to be able to not lose your attention and get distracted for important things that you need to be able to produce. Here's what this is about, and it's something we could all use, that building muscle memory is critical in enhancing and strengthening your negotiation performance. You need a personal system, your own mental dashboard, to be able to recall, to be able to retrieve, to be able to reframe, to recalibrate so that you can respond in the moment. And so what students have taught me, and which I'm trying to refine in my own work with them, is the upfront investment in getting ready to go to the table to do this. critical to this process, and this may have happened to many of you with long and senior job experience already. How long into an average interview of 45 minutes? How long does it take for the employer to decide whether an offer is going to be made today, right? Certainly, it's within these first few minutes, okay? All the rest is polite conversation and cold burnt coffee, okay? All right? And when they start to look at their phone and they start to look out the window of a windowless room, you know that this interview is not going especially well, right? So the first 3 minutes, when you grew up and your families and your folks taught you first impressions really matter, beginnings really matter in negotiation. So how to build rapport and trust quickly is important early on. Capturing thin slices of information. A great deal of negotiation is not verbal. You have to look at the other person, okay? For my younger students, this is a trade-off. I can look at my heroin drip, formerly known as the iPhone, or I can look at the person who I'm speaking to, okay? So I'm trying to create in my office, by the way, a chin strap where students will look up and sort of notice that I'm sitting in the office with them. And so what this is about is seeing sooner, faster. So how do you do this? How do you be effective in the moment? You have to prepare systematically. You have to have a sense of the script, which is made up of these micro skills, which help folks under pressure, public pressure, lead themselves through setting the table, managing the process, which means to being able to make trade-offs in real time and bring the discussion to a credible conclusion. And you do that by practicing writing the victory speech of your counterpart. And what my hope is going forward in our recently developed negotiation and conflict resolution collaboratory is that people can make progress on the toughest public policy issues because they're bringing both intellect, emotion, and their smarts around being ready to solve these problems because they have a systematic way of doing them. Thank you very much.
All right. This was very stimulating 4 sets of presentations, and so we're going to move to Q&A. We're going to do it a little bit different than you might be used to doing Q&As. Let me first put Brian's quote here, or rather Brian's depict of the quote from John F. Kennedy. But what we want you to do now is to go to this QR code. If you have a question, you can add it. But even if you don't have a question, please vote for which questions you want to discuss the most. So we're going to try to do a little bit of a democratic way of doing this. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do this. In the meantime, I'm wondering if any of the speakers wants to connect with what any other of the speakers said. I assume that you might have had the opportunity to see a slide from one of your colleagues and say, this connects with me. Yes? No?
Well, I think all of them connect with the nuclear issue. I mean, in order to resolve it, we're going to need negotiation skills. We're going to need to be able to talk through disagreement. We're going to be able to need to think through signaling and getting our balance right. In particular, one of the things that I think is an important lesson from these past crises that we're doing a book about is nuclear signaling basically doesn't work. The signal that you think you're sending and the signal the other side receives are 2 different and almost unrelated things.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so let's see if we can see here the questions. So I'm going to try to, well, the first question is for Julia. It's a little bit hard to see from here. So Julia, I'm going to read the question for you. How to deal with partners that are not humans sitting at the table? Not humans, okay. But bureaucratic structures, which on their side is always a kind of anonymous, especially when the atmosphere is already poisoned. Examples, negotiation between partners that don't see each other.
Okay, I'm not sure if I totally understand the question. I have to say, when I heard the first part, I thought it was going to be a lot worse than I expected by the second part. You know, there's this famous saying, right? Nations don't have friends, they have interests. Nations don't negotiate. Bureaucracies don't negotiate. Organizations don't negotiate. People negotiate, right? Often they negotiate on behalf of nations or bureaucracies or nonprofits or families, but in the end, there's still people. And so I think a lot of the same sort of skill set that we talk about with dealing with any other human applies to dealing with a human that's representing a group of other humans, right? In other words, why are you here? What are you interested in? What's really driving you? How do you see this problem from your point of view? Because I think only once you have answers to all of those questions can you even sort of begin to advocate for whatever it is you're hoping to advocate for.
Thank you. Julia, second question for you, and then we'll move to others. How does one create receptive conversations when one party is significantly more powerful than the other and isn't receptive?
Okay, that's great. So I often think of receptive conversations, or sort of the receptiveness toolkit, as actually a toolkit that's the most beneficial to the lower power party, right? So if we are parties of equal power, I can sort of take my chances, right? I can be persuasive. If the other person disagrees, I can try to persuade them harder. If they still disagree, I might start yelling. Then we'll see how it goes, right? If I am the lower status party, I can't afford that. And so the question becomes, how do I get this person to listen to me, given that I can't just force them to listen to me? One of the things that receptiveness does very consistently is create reciprocity. So if I'm the lower status person and I am sort of really working to get my adversary to feel heard, odds are they will eventually start asking me questions in return because of that sort of nature of reciprocity.
Thank you. I'm afraid to ask this question, but I will, since it's the most popular one, the second most popular one. The Trump phenomenon, why is he so successful? Anyone wants to take this from wherever your angles are?
I wish I knew.
All right, Brian? I think, yeah, just speak loud to the mic, and I think it'll work.
So I think there's a couple reasons. You know that Trump is a marketer, and he has tapped into, since 2016, a rich vein of grievance in the country. He has tapped into what we might call, sitting here today, of anti-elitism, even though he himself has craved to be part of elites for his whole existence. He's a kind of complicated person in that regard. And what he understands from his world, no news, any kind of news, there's no bad news for Trump. Okay, the trial is an inconvenience, but it's a perfect platform, including the gag order, okay, which is quickly circumvented by bringing in a bunch of people in gray suits and red ties to speak for him on the steps of the courthouse. Since 2020, he's been in the news. They just did a news contenting. He's been in the news every single day, okay? And so he's present. And he is taking on the system. And he's now using, and this is part of a authoritarian sort of part of who he is, I am doing all of this for you. I am doing all of this for you. If I weren't sitting up here, one of you could be facing these things, okay? And so he attacks the justice system, but he expects special treatment as the former president. And because of that, when you talk about his success, is that he pushes the limits on systems. The judge is being very, very disciplined about not sending this guy to prison, even for 48 hours, because then you become the martyr, right? So he's trying to have gag orders at a few $1,000s and penalties, etc. But he is shrewd, Trump, and he understands that even as a negotiator, he understands that bullying and pushing tend to work toward him. Remember, he's engaged in a whole range of behaviors that have proved successful for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be engaging in this. And for those of you, we won't go in this direction, who are not especially fans of Donald Trump, just remember this small fun fact. In the last presidential cycle, 77 million people voted for him, okay? 77 million people voted for him. And who knows, we're still talking a neck-and-neck race with 180 days to go right now. So it's a really important question because it both intrigues folks and it frustrates the heck out of them about why this is happening. It's a great question.
All right. At the risk of not turning this into a political Saturday morning show, I want to sharpen the question a little bit. So, Matt, is the risk of a nuclear war greater or lower with Donald Trump in power?
Nobody knows, because you don't know what particular crises are going to come up during the next presidential term. You could argue perhaps a little bit lower because he has this bizarre fondness for Vladimir Putin, so probably the degree of hostility between the United States and Russia would go down somewhat, which would reduce one possible source of the risk of nuclear war. He also has a bizarre fondness for Kim Jong-un. If he managed to get that going, might be able to reduce the risk of nuclear war a little bit. I do think the risk was a little bit lower during the period when he was doing the summits with Kim Jong-un, though he didn't actually accomplish much out of those summits, and ultimately screwed up the final one. There's an interesting history to be told about how both sides came to the Hanoi summit believing the other side was ready to sign on the bottom line of something that they had absolutely no intention of agreeing to. I mean, the preparation for that summit was so deeply effed up.
To use the technical term. Yeah.
We are lucky, in my view, to have a president as old as President Biden at this moment. And the reason I say that is that during the Cold War, everybody sort of understood that avoiding getting nuked was the central goal of American foreign policy. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we all sort of forgot about that. And those of us who were nuclear experts got shunted to the side of serious foreign policy discussion and only rolled out for specialty topics like North Korea or what have you. And now we're in a world of great power competition with nuclear armed states. And we have to remember that avoiding getting nuked is the central goal of American foreign policy. And Biden is old enough that when he was learning about national security, that was the main deal. You had to learn about, arms control and throw weight and multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles and stuff like that. And so, when it looked like Russia might invade Ukraine, Biden told his staff, number one, first thing, we're not going to World War III. And I think that's been an important guiding light that has reduced the risk. I mean, it used to be in American presidential elections, a very central question was, if there's going to be a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, which of these candidates do you want to be the one that gets it? My preference would be Biden.
Right. So sharpen the question again now for Jeff. Jeff, the economy better or worse under Trump?
Past or future? You're
Future.
asking?
Well, start with the past since it's easier to answer.
Maybe.
I don't see that Trump has much of an economic platform other than cutting taxes for corporations and rich people. I mean, there's a protectionist angle, raising tariffs, but Biden's virtually matching him in that. I think just general unpredictability, and if you look at the way he reacted to coronavirus, I think he would not react well in a crisis situation, which goes to the nuclear point. But I would say worse off. There's this fact which nobody talks about because it's so hard to believe, which is that if you go back over the last 10 presidents, all but one of the recessions have started during Republican presidents, and only one during a Democratic president. Each time there's been a transition from a Democratic president to a Republican president, the growth rate has gone down. Each time it's transitioned to a Democratic president, the growth rate has gone up. Now, I can't explain that. It's too extreme a result to be explained, especially because the president doesn't have complete control over the policies that are enacted, and they don't have complete effect on the outcome. But it's interesting that people aren't aware of this fact, and even that so many people, according to the public opinion polls, trust Republicans in general, and Trump in particular, with the economy more than Biden or Democrats. I can't explain it.
All right, and then Julia, you get the final word on this sharpened question. I'm going to assume that there's some people here who are Trump supporters, and I'm going to assume that some people are not. And imagine that they encounter each other at the JFK Park after this, and they're going to speak to one another. What tip would you give each side to have a receptive conversation? That's beyond what you just showed us here.
That's a good question.
There's a really nice practice that mediators use.
Go ahead.
And they call it the listening triangle. And it goes like this. I say to you, Dan, why do you support President Trump?
Okay, let's role play. You want to do that?
Sure,
okay.
sure.
All right. This is being recorded, right? On YouTube. Okay, so I support President Trump because none of what's happening right now under President Biden would have happened if Trump had been president.
Oh, that's interesting. So tell me more about which events you're talking about.
Russia would not have invaded Ukraine because Vladimir Putin is a very good friend of Donald Trump. Israel would not be doing what it's doing. We wouldn't have college campus protests. You name it. It would have been much better.
Okay, so let me understand this better. How do you think, I mean, I understand that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin being friends is helpful to sort of the stability of their relationship. Tell me more about how that would have played out in Ukraine.
Well,
I'm giving him the harder part here.
I think, I think Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump would have called him at night and said, "Don't do this," and it wouldn't have happened. I don't know.
Okay, so the high points here.
Okay.
Right. I have tried very, very hard, and this is not easy, to resist my temptation to be like, what the hell are you talking about? You think he would have really called him in the middle of the night, and you think that would have really made a difference, right? I keep asking questions, and I keep restating. The reason it's a triangle is I ask a question, I restate the answer, and then I say, did I get that right? tell me more. And then he talks some more. And then I say, did I get that right? Tell me more. And ask a question. And had we done this for a lot more time than you all have patience for, listening to this in third party, eventually Dan would have been like, well, what do you think, Julia? Right? Because eventually you start feeling like I've been talking, and this person has been graciously listening, and I have said all the things, and she perfectly understands me. I wonder what it is that she thinks. Okay? And so there's no easy trick. It's like a slow, hard-working trick, but this is how you get to having a sensible conversation.
All right. We just went through 4 different answers on the same question under different versions of the question. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so you have other things to attend to in your program, but please join me in giving them a warm round of applause. Thank you.